In the CodeIgniter docs, we're at the session class, and if you've used sessions in PHP, they're pretty easy to use. But there are some benefits to using the CodeIgniter session class, and I'll show you. If I scroll down a little ways, it says, what is session data? Now, it stores a unique user ID for the session ID, and they say it's very strong random with very strong entropy, which means it's very unlikely to repeat the encryption. It's hashed with MD5 and regenerated every 5 minutes, and it contains some basics about the users. It's some added security, and that's good. So the only difference really is that getting data from the session is a little different. You call this session user data and then the value. So in this array above here, if I wanted to get session ID, I would just put session ID right there. And adding data is where we set user data, and you just pass in an array if you'd like, or you can pass in one value at a time. The only caution here, luckily they put it in red, is cookies can only hold 4 kilobytes of data, and we can't exceed that capacity. Now, in most cases, you don't really need to worry, because 4 kilobytes for what we're actually going to put in a session is a lot. We only need like a couple of values, and it shows you how to unset it. So let's get to it. The first thing we need to do is go to our config and then our config PHP, and I'm just gonna press Control F to find, and I'll just look for encryption key. And you need an encryption key for to use the session class, because CodeIgniter will encrypt the key for you. And this is good, because if two people using CodeIgniter, they'll never have the same encryption key. So you could put whatever you like in there. For now, I guess I'll put just a random string. I'll just say junior-456. You can put anything you'd like, and it can be something crazy. Okay, you just have to set something in there. Okay. If we scroll down below a little bit more, we can change the cookie name if we'd like. I'm going to leave it default, but if you do have a problem with it, you could change it. The table name is if you decide to save sessions to a table, and I'm not going to do that. So what I'll do now is I'll just close this guy out and open our controllers. So to log in, the way I'm going to do that for now is open the user controller, and these are all test functions below. But what I'm going to do is a function called login. So I'll say public function login. Okay. And I'm going to load the session class, but I could say this load library session. Well, I actually want to have that loaded all the time, to be honest. And it saves me a lot of time just to go to config auto load and load the session library like this. I know we're jumping to these configurations a lot, but if you look back, we're not really in and out of them too much. It's just that I have to show you step by step what we're doing. Otherwise, you would just toss in your values here and you'd be done with it. So don't be discouraged just if it feels like a lot of configuration right now. You'll get the hang of it, and I guarantee CodeIgniter will save you a lot of time. So for the login, what we're going to do is a get, and we're actually going to post stuff to it. Before we get to that, we want to play with our session class. So let's say this session user data. There is no user data yet, so I'll say set user data, and here I'll pass in an array, and I'll say user ID will be 1, like that. And I'll go to, I can go ahead and close that page and refresh, and we want to get the user data and print it out. So this session user data. I'll say session equals that, and I'll just print R it out. And I accidentally loaded the wrong page. I need to go to user/login. User/login. And it says missing argument 1 for session user data. Let's see. On line 19. It's because I'm using this, but I want to get all user data, but I was treating this like it was for getting all user data, and that's only one value, like that. But I need to put all user data, like so. And I'll refresh the page, and we have all this stuff. See this session ID? It's pretty encrypted and prevents other people from manipulating it. So if I go to my Chrome developer tools, I believe I can see a cookie somewhere in here. Let's see. Forgive me, it's not this area. It's actually in your settings. So settings, and I'll just search for cookie and content settings, all cookie and site data, and I'll just look for workspace, and we have 3 cookies, and we have a CodeIgniter session. So I know we had to do quite a bit of digging to get here, but here's the CodeIgniter session data here, and the content, that's just URL encoded. So remember the CI session in the config? That's just what it's called. You could change it to something else if you wanted to prevent people from knowing you were using CodeIgniter, but I wanted to show you this, and we could remove it, and then if I go back and refresh, you see I get a totally different hash. So that's the gist of a session. What we're going to do is give us the ability to log in the user. So in our dashboard, we want to confirm that the user's logged in. Otherwise, we don't want to let them in there. So in my index page, actually in fact in every single page under dashboard, the user needs to be logged in. So to do that, I'm just going to do a construct, public function construct. And I know we only have 2 methods in here, but further down the road perhaps we'll have more. But this will just take care of it all in one shot. So I'll say this session user data user ID, okay, and I'll say user ID equals that, and I'll say if user ID is false, then we're going to redirect to heck, we could just do logout. I'll just say logout. Okay, and since we're using the session class now, instead of doing session destroy, we'll say this session destroy. The session's a little weird, some of the strings you have to get used to, but you want to do this instead of session destroy because this is actually a cookie. And this has to be this logout. Okay, so if there's no ID, we'll just run the logout. So if there's like a session or something going on, or they try to manipulate it, just make sure we delete anything that's in there. So going back, let's try to go. I want to delete this session first, so let me try to reload this. I wish they had a refresh button on there. Workspace. Workspace. Well, I'll refresh the page. If anyone knows a better way of doing this, do tell. There we go. So CI session, and I'll just scroll down and remove it. And now that we have no session, let's go to the dashboard page. Cool, and it takes us back to the login. So that'll be a nice little way to secure us from having invalid people entering our page. So with this set, we're going to want to make sure we set the user ID in the session when they successfully log in. So back in the user controller, when they log in, we're actually going to set user data like this. Now this is going to come from MySql, and we will get to that. We're going to have to take a look at the post class next. Alright guys, it's going to be a little fun now. We're going to actually use jQuery to do a post. So the first thing is, let's open up our views, go to our home folder and our home view, and we're going to post this good old form here. So you might be asking, well, where am I going to put my JavaScript? I personally like to put it at the end of my file in the view, unless it's like a entire JavaScript application. This is up to you. If you decide to include your JavaScript files from someplace else, that's no problem. You could even say script src equals, base URL, and put it inside of your public folder somewhere. But I just like to do it straight up like this. And maybe some people might smite me, but sometimes it's easier. And we're going to do jQuery's document ready, just with the dollar symbol and function. Okay. And for fun, let's make sure it's working. I just like to throw in an alert 1. And people usually want to smack me for typing alerts, but it's just a quick and dirty way to see if something's working. Okay, I got my alert. If you didn't get your alert, you should open Chrome Console Tools. And I'm hoping you're using Chrome because it's probably the best browser. And you'd look in your network tab and refresh the page, and if you have anything that's in red, you would know that it did not get loaded. Okay, so with this, let's see what we have. We have our form here, and the form has a class, and I'm going to give it an ID just so it's unique, and in case we were to ever add a form on here later, it would still be unique. So I'll just give it login form ID like that, and down here we'll say login form. This selects the login form element dot submit, and submit only works with forms. Okay, it's different than click. So instead of saying submit.click, I'm saying form.submit, because this way I can serialize the form a lot easier. Okay, and I'll have a function. Okay, and I'll have my event right here, and I'll say event.prevent default. Basically that'll prevent the form from submitting. So go back and refresh and click. Nothing should be happening, and that's correct. If it were submitting, you'd see it go to the action and it would have a question mark there. Okay. So next we need to give this form an action, and even though we're doing this through JavaScript to post the form, I like to put it in the action here still, because it's easy to do. So I'll say site URL user/login. So hopefully you can see that. And just make sure you have your quotations correct, otherwise you'll have some serious frustrations. And what I like to do is say this.attribute action and this.serialize. And I'll give these a variable, and I'll call this URL and this post data. Okay. And to post it, it's pretty easy. We just do the post like that, and I'll post to the URL, the post data, and the callback function. Okay, and I want my data in JSON. I always want my data returned as JSON. So after here, I'll put a comma JSON. Okay, and we're going to need to see what's being posted, and that's going to introduce us to the input post class. So under controllers, we'll go to user, login, and I'm going to put a die statement right here briefly so we can test it. First of all, let's do a print R of the post that's in regular PHP. Okay, and I'm going to open up this little guy here and log in and look at the network. Oops, I better refresh the page and log in. Okay, so you see how it's calling that page through Ajax now, and it's doing a post method here. That's what we did through jQuery. So the request headers, let's see, we just passed in some empty data. You see serialize will pass in the form for you. So if I put in some values here and scroll down to the form data like that, and let's go to the response, and good, it is posting the data. Okay, so our input post class, so I'll say this input post login, and this is always loaded for you. We'll also do one for password. And one thing I should tell you is, you might be asking, why don't I just use post login? And honestly, you could, and I wouldn't even complain. But the benefit to using the built-in input is that, for one, it'll fix any Windows new line characters. Say if you had a text field, it standardizes those for you. It also prevents against XSS attacks. It just filters out hackish code. Other than that, I don't see like a huge benefit, but that's about that. I will be using it though. So I'll say login equals login and password equals password. Okay. Okay. And that's really the post class. All it really is. For XSS filtering, you're going to have to go to your config once again and config, and just look for XSS, and I'll set this to true. Nobody wants XSS stuff. People trying to hack you. Okay, now when I look at this, it kind of indicates I need to refactor the user model a little bit. Where we would be able to pass in a custom value. So let me briefly open up the models folder and go to user. And my get, I want to be able to do a where statement because I want to see where the user ID is meeting a certain criteria. And this begs the question, well, aren't we really just making all this work for really 2 lines of code? And we are, but the purpose of doing this is to show you a little later a very flexible way to make use of stuff. So have faith in that, okay? With this, I'm going to check if user ID is an array, okay? So in here I'll say else if is array user ID, and we'll just do another get where, and we'll pass in the user ID, okay, and this would be an array. So we'll do a get where user ID, okay, so just get where user ID. And back to our user class, I'll say this user model get, and I'll say login equals login and password equals password, okay, and I'll call this result. Let me print R of the result. Okay, and I need to make a real login and password. We'll talk about encryption eventually. So how about our login will just be admin admin for now. Make it easy. And on our page, let's try to log in. Okay, empty array. Now let's try admin admin. And there we go, we have a user. So that's what we want. And with this data, we're going to get the user ID. So it's always going to be in slot 0 here. So I'm going to say if result, if there's a result, we will set the user data, we'll set the user ID, and we're going to want to output data, and we're actually going to want to output some JSON. Let me remove these guys. We can use CodeIgniter's built-in output, which in my opinion this output isn't the best, and we might redo it later, but we'll say this output set content type. This would be application JSON. This is the header. It has to output a certain header in HTML, HTTP, so that it knows the type. I believe we can chain this too, and this output set output, and I'll say JSON encode, and I'll just pass in, let's make an output variable. So output will be an array. Well, let me do it this way. See, I really don't like CodeIgniter's output class like this. So for the output, we'll just do it like this, and I'll say result is a success. Okay. I'll cut this guy, since we're always going to output JSON. I'll just throw him up here, and then for there, down here we'll do a 0, and below here let's just say return false. Okay. Basically what's happening is we're going to query this guy. Let me get rid of output. And if there is a result, it's going to return successful. Otherwise, it's going to return false. So sorry for the hiccup there. So for the user ID, we just want to pass in the user ID that logged in, and that would be result 0 user ID. Okay. Now I'll go ahead and I believe that's good. So log in. Look at this, and we get result 1. Beautiful. Let me change this to admin2. Try to log in. Good. So with that being set, this successfully sets our session. So in our home view, we'll say if o.result equals 1, else we'll just alert invalid login. Okay, that's the first thing we want to do. Or we'll alert a good login. Okay, so I'll refresh, and I'll say admin and some numbers, invalid login, and if we type admin, good login. Okay, so looking at this code, we're going to use this to redirect our page. So I'll say in JavaScript it's window.location.href equals, and then the place we're going to take them. So basically we've done an AJAX post to create a session, and which is queried a database, created a session, and then we're going to redirect them to the dashboard. And we're going to redirect them to the site URL of dashboard. So let's see if that actually works. Admin. There they are. They're in the dashboard, and they haven't been kicked back. That means the session's been set correctly. Okay, and I'm just going to once over this code with my eyeballs, make sure everything feels tidy. Okay, and we'll be covering a bit more. This isn't a final login. but it's a good start. In this video, we're going to create a valid password that's secure for our user. So we're going to cover two topics. One is hashing, the other is encryption. So CodeIgniter has a built-in encryption class, and you can think of encryption like you can encrypt something and you can decrypt something, meaning it's reversible. Hashing is a one-way translation, meaning it doesn't have a way to reverse it. So just for fun, let's go to controllers in our home controller, and I'll make a public function, and I'll just call it code. And to load the encryption library that's built in, we would say this load library, and it's a little hard to type, crypt. Did I spell that right? Encrypt. Okay. So I'm going to refresh my home page /code to make sure that worked. So home /code. Okay. I would have gotten an error if it didn't load properly. And then we can do this encrypt encode my secret password. Okay. And we can encode this and echo it out. Refresh, and we get this crazy long string. However, we could actually copy this and decrypt it as well. So if I comment this string out and do echo this encrypt decode with that string we had, refresh it, and it gives the secret password. Now that's something we don't want for passwords. We don't want them to be reversible in any way, shape, or form. I will say that the encryption here does use the same encryption key that you set in your config previously. Remember, we set that in config way down yonder. So this is not what we're going to use to create passwords. We're actually going to use a built-in PHP function called hash. And with hash we can just do SHA-256 and then my secret password, like this. Okay, so let me just refresh the page, and here it is. This is 64 characters in length that we'll use for our database. Obviously not this exact one, but the issue we might have is this should be salted. And what I mean is, let's say we just had the password admin with SHA-256. This would be the default password. I know it's a lot of characters and this might seem a little weird, but if there was someone had a dictionary of collected words over time, which would be called a dictionary attack, admin will register as this exact string. So what you usually want to do is salt your password. And by salting it, you just use a predefined value to add on to the string. So then if your password was actually admin in your system, and you'd add on an additional string like salt, something like that. And if I refresh, this password is totally different and wouldn't be based on a dictionary attack. So what we'd want to do is make a constant out of this. So I'll go to my constants in config. I'm just going to copy this whole file block so I can have my own. And I'll say custom constants. And I'll say define. You can call yours what you'd like. I'll just call mine salt and then give it a value. Once you set this and use passwords with it, you should never change it. Otherwise your passwords aren't going to mix and match correctly. So with this, I'll say just another salt. And how about just something random? Okay. So in here we would actually do admin dot salt, like that. Have it more secure. So refresh and we have a crazy password. And what I'm going to do is copy this and open up my database connection. In my user table, my admin password will actually be that crazy long string. And you're going to want to make sure the whole thing got inserted. So just look at the last character. Mine was AF, and if I look at this, it's AF. That way you know you made your table field long enough. So now that we have that, I'll just cut that out and comment out code and close these guys. We'll go to our user controller, and for the login, when they type in the regular hard-coded password, we pass in the password encrypted. So instead of admin here, it would be password. This is in the user controller. Okay, so type that out. Okay, and this is in an array, so make sure there's no commas or semicolons here. So now it's going to check based on a correct hashing table. So I'll go ahead and go back to my home page, and admin should work, and there it goes. Now you have a more secure way to hash your passwords, check them and log them in and all that. If someone were to register, we'd also want to apply the same hash like that as well. But for now, we're just going to have a hard-coded thing in here. We could actually leave it in here. If we want to create a custom password or something. But that covers it for this.